I'll tell you what we're gonna do today. I'm gonna get us caught up here in just a second, but I'm gonna tell you a quick story. So we're wrapping up the series Beyond Us, and honestly, I feel like I could keep teaching on this section of the Bible for a long time because not only is it fascinating, but it's super applicable. But today we're gonna press pause, so we're gonna get us all caught up here in a second. Before we do, recently I had an issue with my computer. Have you guys ever done this before? And you've called tech support? How many of you ever called tech support? Like you actually called it, you didn't chat, you actually made a phone call to a human. Yeah. And I did recently, it was with an Apple thing. Obviously the lighting is working, so that's what it was. That was the computer. And I get on and I'm having this like long conversation. And my mom did this for a little bit where she did some tech support stuff. And there's scripts, which I didn't know at the time. There's like scripts that they do. And so if it's this issue, they're kind of prompting you and then they'll elevate you to the next tier and elevate you. And so after about 45 minutes on this call, I kept getting elevated up and up and up the chain. Now, a fun fact about me is I will say this. I've used Apple since I was a freshman in college. I am very into it. In another life, I would have loved to do like tech stuff. In fact, I used Keynote, which is like PowerPoint for Mac, so much that at one point I found a bug in the system. Thank you so much. And I actually got Apple to change it. So if you want to know what I'm most proud of, it's marrying my wife, it's my children. Our church, but real close, is figuring out the Apple thing. Yeah. And so like I'm kind of in this world. And so we got all the way through this phone call. And by 45 minutes in, the guy just kind of pauses. He goes, hey, I know this is kind of weird, but you restarted it, right? And I was like, yeah, but I lied. I had not. And then he goes, well, let's just try that. Let's restart it one more time. And have you ever had this before where you restarted the thing and as soon as you restarted it, whatever the issue was, it was just fixed? Anybody ever had one of those before? Like whatever it was, like you did this, you hit reset on it. And as soon as you hit reset, everything started working. And then everybody at the end of this has like the same version of the same grunt where there's like, you know what I mean? Like there's just this piece where you just go like, I should have thought of that. I should have started with it. And so we get on the line and we're having this conversation. I said, hey, I restarted it, it worked, but because we know each other so well after all this time, I asked him, I was like, why does that work so much? And he said a fascinating thing, which I should know at this point, but he said this. He said, when you restart it, he goes, it's almost like you're clearing out all of the like weird kind of peripheral brain stuff of the computer, and it just sort of resets, and it doesn't have any of those attachments to it. And I was like, that is a fascinating thing. And as I thought about it, I was like, that's what we're going to hit today, right? Is this idea of taking a moment and resetting. Now, this is an interesting time of year to do it because those of you who are kind of type A, like I am, you've probably already started like prepping for your next year. How many of you already started goal setting? Anybody already thinking about goals? Are you like goals? How many of you are like goals are for other people? I don't do that so much. Anybody? Yeah, that's okay too. And how many of you are like that's December during Christmas? Yeah, anybody do that? Okay. So I usually get started like at the end of November. Start thinking about everything. And it's a little depressing because I will look at the things that I didn't do that I knew I should have done and I wish I would have done. And I'll have that list. I always have like a stop doing list too. And I want to make more progress on that than I actually end up making. And then I have like all of sort of like financial goals, family goals, all that kind of stuff. And there's something about this time of the year where I'm more busy than I usually am. And at the same time, I'm like, I need like a reset space to get into this and begin unpacking it. And so today, here's what I'm going to tell you. Everything up front, we'll look at the text, but I'll tell you where we're going. What I want to do over the next few minutes is convince you to do this in a real and meaningful way, and then give you a couple of like handles on how to do this. But I want to do this spiritually. So here's what I'm going to do kind of like as a caveat to get us all in the same space. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, there's a practical component to this that's going to feel Stephen Covey-esque. So you can apply it to that level if you're not a follower of Jesus, or if you want to go all in, I would encourage you to apply the fullness of what we're going to talk about, even if you don't fully believe yet, because I do think it's going to change your life as well. And so we're going to talk about that for the next few minutes. Now, the caveat is this. Most of us come into the room, and I'm like this, and we run into this like reset area, trying to fix most everything in our lives, sort of like particularly without actually like pausing to hit a full stop and reset, right? And so what I'm gonna assume for most of us is that when you came in here, and this is true of me this week too, that I have all of these things that I'm working on, all of these things that I wish were a little bit different, all of these things that I think need to be changed in my life. Some of them I'm really working on, some of them I'm pretending to work on, some of them I'm actually working on, but I got all these things and I'm working on them individually. And what I want you to do for the next few minutes is not to just stop thinking about all of those things, But for the next few minutes to say, I'm not going to choose during this message to think about all of them individually. I want you to think about all of it as a whole. Like, how do we reset the whole operating system, the whole thing in your life, and take a pause and go, how do we do that? Now, I want to get us all caught up because we are like 6 weeks into this series. We've been talking about the Israelites for the last 5 weeks. And without going into all the detail for all of this, this group of people that God had promised a sort of area of the world or a land to get us all caught up. They were going to take it, and then they came back, and there were 12 people that go in there. 10 of them go, hey, like, I don't think we can do it. 2 of them go, I think we can. And because a lot of them didn't think they could, fear spread. They didn't end up going in. A whole generation passes away because God said, no, the consequences of that are I'm going to make you wait. And then they end up going in, they go into the land, they get the land, and then after that, we talked about this, and there were other things that God had for them to do that required faith, and we said this kind of throughout the entire journey, that's this, that God has already been powerful on their behalf leading up to all of these moments. I won't go through all this, but any 1 or 2 of them would have been enough for them to go, look, God shows up miraculously in my life. And then what happened is they would get on the edge of these moments of courage, and it felt like a lot of times they just couldn't figure out what to do next, right? And so we said this in the first 2 or 3 weeks in this. These are some of the points we said. We said, you don't enter into new territory with old mindsets, which laid the foundation for the whole series. So we're going, hey, if that's true, then we have to keep going. And we go, like, transitional moments in life require new courage. They do not require new conditions. Like, the things that need to change for you to have courage, that doesn't have to shift. You can have courage and take those moments without new conditions. And then we said the edges of your limitations are the beginning of his strength in all of those spaces. And this was the story of the Israelites over and over again, as God would say, hey, I'm calling you to go into this area or to conquer this part, or this land is yours. They're supposed to go in there and have that kind of faith. And then we talked about over and over, there was like this struggle and this courage. Now, what we're going to pick up today, again, we're talking about the Israelites, and we're going to pick up today is, I want to do one more message in this series, but I'll give you a quick synopsis. What happens after where we left off last week is they go, we talked about Jericho, they all march, they have to have faith to do that. It's kind of the mundane marching, and then all of a sudden the miracle comes on the other side of it. And then God actually tells them to go to an area of the world called Ai, or AI, is where it's at. And then what happens is during the process of them going to this new area, right, there's a person who goes and essentially like steals things that he shouldn't steal. And if you've ever heard the phrase, like, there's sin in the camp, you guys ever heard this before? Like, there's sin in the camp? This is where that comes from. And so what happens is for this entire group of people, there's a blemish on the entire group of people because they were unfaithful to what God said. And this is a really, like, not tuck your kids in bed at night story, because what happens is God says there's consequences for disobedience. And the consequences for this person's disobedience was actually death. And you look through this story, and all of a sudden they have to, retreat, and they come back, they figure out where the sin of the camp was, and there's this unfaithfulness to it. He ends up dying, and they go back, and they conquer this area of the world. Now, what happens next is one of the more fascinating parts, I think, of the entire Old Testament, because the person who had come before Joshua, who's the leader of this group of people, was a guy named Moses. And we all know Moses for the staff and the water and all that stuff. But at the end of sort of his time, he gave a very clear instructions on what was to happen almost in this rhythmic way with this group of people to remind them of who they are and where they came from. And so what happens is all of the, I stuff happens, AI stuff happens. And then they get into what comes next. And Joshua is about to take this whole group of people who had, so many years of like highs and lows and deep lows and kind of good and then highs again. And all of this, it's almost like a heartbeat of following God. And he follows Moses' instructions and he gathers them all together. This is where we're going to read today. To do something very specific around a reset, both corporately and individually for this group of people, right? So here's what it says. We're going to be in Joshua chapter 8. So again, fascinating. It says this. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord. Now, I want to paint this in your head as best I can. This isn't some small, I used to think of altars like these sticks. You burning something on sticks. I never had a great view of the altar. This would have been a massive undertaking that he would have taken to create this very visible altar for this group of people to come around. an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses. So again, they didn't have a Bible like we have it, but they had the law of Moses, which would have been a summary of a lot of the things that God had given Moses to teach these people. Right? And now this is the fascinating part. And if you read it without sort of the context, you can quickly miss this. But it says, the altar was of uncut stones, on which no iron tool had been used. And on it, they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. Now, this is, if I can paint this picture in your mind, this is an altar. They would have had sort of inscribed on this massive altar the entirety of the summary of the sort of book of Moses or law of Moses, right? But the uncut part was fascinating because what this symbolized was that all of the technology innovation that they would have had, right, to make this easier, they were to put aside, right? And what they were going to do is they were going to take these uncut stones or these sort of more jagged, specifically like not used with iron or their technology. They were to build it from something that was specifically not tethered to what they came up with. They were to build this based off of only what God had provided, which is a fascinating visual. And you get this group of people who goes, there's an easier way to do it. There's a way to even inscribe on here what we're inscribing on here. But no. The command from God to Moses, then Moses to ultimately Joshua, was that it would be uncut stones that were laid. And then it goes on and it says this in verse 32. Yep. It says, they're in the presence of the Israelites. Joshua wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses. Now, scholars, I will say this. There's like the long version, then there's the summary version, then there's a really short version. Nobody really knows exactly how much we're talking, but it's a lot, right? One of those three versions was written down for this group of people to engage with, to look at, and to see, and ultimately to be a centering point, remembering the instruction, the boundaries, and the clarity that God was going to give them on what it looked like to move forward. And it goes on, it says this. It says, all the Israelites, so again, all of them, this is a lot of people. All the Israelites with their elders, officials, and judges were standing on both sides. Again, I'll paint this as great as best we can. Both sides of the Ark of the Covenant, facing the Levitical priest who carried it. So again, if you can picture this, there's the Ark of the Covenant that would have been carried by these priests. They carry it to the center point of all of these people. Now again, this isn't like a couple hundred people. This is thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And at the center of this is the presence of God. The tangible, the real presence of God. And what they were about to do, and don't miss this, was encircle the presence of God and look in different directions that are very specific in the ways that they're supposed to look. So it goes on in verse 33, and I love this, it says this. So both the foreigners living among them, right? So as they conquer these lands, there would be foreigners that were a part of this tribe now. And the native born were there. So this is all the people. And then it goes on and it says this in verse 33, it says, half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim. Now, that's how I say it. I'm sure there's somebody who says it better than me, but that's how I say it, right? And half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formally commanded when he gave the instructions to bless the people of Israel. Now, there's a visual around this that I think is so fascinating because both of these mounts have a specific meaning, right? And this is where I'm going to geek out on my Bible stuff, but both have a specific meaning. One of them is the Mount of Blessing, and one of them is the Mount of Cursing. And in the middle of this is the Ark of the Covenant, or the presence of God. And all of these people were to surround the presence of God, both looking towards one of these mountains, which means this. Part of them were looking towards blessing. Part of them were looking towards cursing. All of them were looking in a direction, and all of them had to look over the presence of God to see it. I promise we're going somewhere. All right, here we go. It says, afterwards, Joshua read. Now I love this. All the words of the law, right? Now again, long version, we don't know. Medium version, we're not sure. Or the summary. But even the summary was long, right? More than my 45-minute sermons. And it wasn't just a few of them. This is all the kids, all the women. Everybody was around for him to stop and read all of this. Now, I want to pause just for a second because I know this. When was the last time outside of Netflix that you sat down and engaged for like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours in anything. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is the most fascinating thing to me of all of it. Now, again, they had less to do. They did not have your iPhone, I don't think. But, they weren't doing that. But they all were gathered around, and Joshua reads the entirety of this law of Moses to this group of people, word for word, over and over again. They're all just kind of sitting there. Now, you know this too, because you're around it. Some of you were this kid in school. I just imagine of all the thousands of people, there had to be somebody back there like, will you please, God, wrap this up? You know what I mean? Could you speed read it? Could we, come on? There's a little bit of that. But it was like he took his time to read the centering piece for all of this group of people so that they would reset from all of the things that they had just walked through. Now, to give you a little bit of clarity, I think this is interesting. It goes on, it says, there was not just the word of all that Moses had commanded, that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women, children, the foreigners. Everybody was there. All right. Now, blessing and cursing, I'll say this. I grew up in a context when we talked about blessing and cursing. I don't know how to say this any better. It was like God had favorites, and it was always the people that weren't sinning more, and that's who his favorites were. Do you know what I'm saying? And if you did that, then you experienced God's blessing. And if you didn't do that, you experienced the curse or the consequence of that. Now, the older that I grew up, and this is what's kind of fascinating, the more I actually agreed, but not in the same way, right? Not in the same way. And here's what I mean by that. There are things that are outside of your control that you had no control over. You were born into the family that you were born into. You did not adjust the decision-making of your parents, all of it. You didn't adjust where you were born, any of that stuff. But there is a whole segment of our lives from the time that we're children until the time that we die where you have decisions that you make every day, and don't miss this, that affect the entirety of your life. And so again, in the best way that you can imagine, in the center of this group of people is the Ark of the Covenant, the tangible presence of God, some looking at blessing, some looking at cursing. And what we mean by that is this. The blessing is the natural outcomes of living aligned with God's ways. Blessing is not random reward. It's the built-in fruit of living in God's design. And here's why this matters so much, ready? As you look at this group of people, you found, and you would find, that the times where they experienced the power and the blessing of God were the times when they were most aligned with what he had already said for them to do. And then the cursing side, which again is fascinating. This is not like the ring, right? This is not that kind of cursing kind of stuff. Certainly not what some of you said yesterday when that first pass came from. Anyway, we'll talk about that. That was funnier than you gave it credit for, because some of y'all did. You saw that second pass and you were like, help us God, we're losing. Anyway, all right, cursing is this. The natural outcomes of rejecting God's ways. Cursing is not God being petty or punishing. It's the natural collapse that happens when you disconnect from the source of life. Or more importantly, you put yourself at the center of it. And we can live in a world, and don't miss this, where we reject this. But the most fascinating thing to me on this is when you live outside of God's design, you experience the consequences of your sin, and God has never promised to remove the earthly consequences to the sins that we commit. Blessing and cursing. So what Joshua does with this whole group of people, and I love it, is he calls them all together. And again, as best as you can picture this, thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Ark of the Covenant, all the priests in the middle. They're looking over the presence of God to either blessing or cursing as a warning or a promise. And then Joshua is reading the law of Moses to remind them of what it means to follow him. And in a almost like national sort of like capacity for this group of people, here's what he's doing. He's hitting the reset button for all of them. Now, I've read this most of my life on and off. I think the Old Testament's fascinating. I love to read it. But it's only been recently that I read this and I went, this one scene in the narrative of Joshua's leadership is one of the most defining moments for everybody. Don't miss this. Because it is one of the last things that we go to, even though it is really what we need most of the time. You can try to tweak a few of the dials in your life and see a little bit of progress here and there. But what most people need is to stop altogether, hit reset, and be reminded of who you are and whose you are. And what I've found in my life, and this is always fast, some of you know this, one of my favorite things to do is I'll take people in their 80s. If I can find people in their 90s, I will sit down and I was like, tell me about your life, tell me about your life, tell me about your life. You know what no one ever tells me? This is always fast. No one ever tells me this, and it's my go-to every time. No one in their 80s and 90s says, man, I wish I would have just strived harder, tried harder, just been more and more and more practical. I don't hear that hardly ever. What I hear more and more is some version of there was this thing that happened and it caused me to go, I'm going to hit reset in this area of my life and change the trajectory of it. I'm going to change the direction of my life. I did it. You hear these stories about marriages all the time, and you've heard it too. Our marriage was this, and then it was struggling, and then we were like here, and then we hit whatever bottom was. And we were like, when we hit bottom, it wasn't like, well, we should just go on more dates, even though you should go on more dates. It was like we had to hit a reset button to get back to where we needed to go and build from there. Some of you know this with your kids. Like I talk to families sometimes who have like estrangement with their kids, which is, this is one of the, it's fun. This week I read about it. Oprah's talking about this now. I always like this is blowing up everywhere. Like estrangement from kids. One of the most fascinating things is usually people in their 20s and 30s and their parents. And you hear the stories of this of people that are older. And most of the estrangement stuff wasn't like we were here and then we were here. It was a decline that happened and bottomed out to some degree. And when it bottomed out, there wasn't like, and then I just showed up for Thanksgiving. It wasn't, and then I just did a thing. It wasn't just like I just applied 3 principles. It was, we hit reset on the relationship. And when we hit reset, then we started to build back from there. And it's not simple, and it's painful, and it's very difficult. That's what happened. This is true of finances. Come on, you know this. You know this. Some of you have been in this. Some of you are in this now. And some of you are about to make it worse over Christmas, which I totally get. You know what I mean? But I'll say this. It was never like, and then, I mean, sometimes, but rarely, it doesn't, the bottom just falls out. It's a slow decline that gets you here. And then when it gets you here, now you know this, what happens is you either get serious about it or you don't. But when you get serious about it, you hit reset. And it's not that we saved $20 the other day. It's that we hit reset and we restructured our entire thing around the financial thing. And when we did that, then we started to move from there. And I'll say this, we apply this in so many principles to our lives, but we do not apply this spiritually. Many of us have drifted away from what I would say is like our first love when we come to faith, and we drift and we drift and we drift. And you maybe haven't like bottomed out yet, but you've gotten to this place where you're kind of in the middle of this. What you've ultimately done is placed yourself in the seat of God in your life, and you're here. And what you don't need to do, and this is what people like me that have a microphone talk about, they're like, if you just applied all the spiritual discipline, if you got into the woods and you pray more, then all of a sudden it's gonna happen. The woods are great for some of you. It's not for me. I don't like spiders. But outside of that, like, you know, the woods are great. But I'd say like, but it doesn't change because you did one thing. It changes when you go, boom, I hit reset. And maybe you should go to the woods for that. But it's not like a one-time discipline. It is a reset button and a new trajectory going over here that needs to happen. And in this time of the year, come on, let me tell you, this is the time of the year where you look back and you said all of the promises that I made to myself and all of the things that I said I was gonna do and all of the things that I wish I was that I am not now. It doesn't need me just to muster up more discipline for most of it. What most of it needs is a full, hard stop, shut the computer off, turn it back on, let it clear the cache. Did I say that right, tech people? Yeah, I did. Score. Clear the cache, and then let it reboot in the way that it's supposed to reboot with the simple things that you did in the beginning. You need a reset in those areas. And I'll say this, and then I'm gonna give you a couple of things around this, and we're gonna wrap up. If you're like me, and this is me because I know me, I'm sitting there and I'm hearing me talk about this, what most of us are saying is, this is a fantastic sermon for someone else, you know? This is a great thing. Some of you are even nudging your spouse in the middle, like, this is for you, are you listening? You know, there's a little bit of that. And the more you don't feel like you need it, the more you need it. You realize that you need an adjustment on this because the less dependent you are on God in these areas, and the more dependent you are on you, the more that spirals you into a place of comfort and missing, I think, what his best for your life is. All right, so I'll give you a phrase around this, and this is how we're going to talk about it for the next few minutes. I want you to think of this like a dashboard, right? Dashboard. Now, how many of you are car people? Like, you're good at cars. You know how to fix them. You change your own oil because yeah, I know you are. You're like, aren't you rebuilding one? Aren't you? Yeah, you are. How many of you are not car people and you're like, man, praise God for those people. We go pay those people a lot of money and you're not even sure what they're doing. You're just like, take my money and make the light go away. You know what I'm saying? Is that okay? That's just me. On my dashboard though, I never get this. There's like the check engine light. And did you know that like the check engine light can be on and you can be okay? But it doesn't tell you what the problem is. I always think it's fascinating. But you like just know that there's a general problem that you need to fix, right? So let me say it this way. I think when it comes to your life in general around the simple parts of the spirituality that we're talking about, there's a dashboard and a check engine light in 3 specific areas. Now, I think there's more than 3. So it's not just 3. But these are the 3 that I think when you look at, you go, does something need a reset in this area? Now, can I say this before we get into it, just so that we can all say this together? The 3 that I'm going to tell you are boring. They're not worded to be catchy. You're going to assume that you're probably already doing a good job on them. So I'm going to lower this bar as low as I can possibly lower it. And also, when I read it out, you're going to go, it feels like you should think of deeper things in life. And I would say, I'm from South Carolina, but the second thing I would say is this. Also, I'm right. Because I am. And the simpler it is, the more you need to engage with it here. Because, come on, can I just say, I'm reading this very bluntly. Most of my issues are overcomplicating these things. Christianity is not complicated in this way. It's very clear and easy to understand and ridiculously difficult to do for a long time in a deep way. All right? So here's the first deep one, all right? You need to look at your gauge of spending time with God. Now, if you immediately went, I read my Bible 7 times this week, I am talking to you, all right? Maybe you've never heard a pastor say this. I could care less how many times you've read your Bible as a checklist. I care so much more about how much you engage with the Bible and you pray to a personal God. I care about the relational side of this. Now, let me tell you what I mean by this, right? Like, me and Emily, there's like a 2-week period that's super busy in our family. This is that period for us. And so we will jokingly say there are seasons of our life where we feel like we're like ships passing the night. And kids, ironically, didn't make that easier. So it's kind of fun. Now we're ships passing in the night, and there's a storm coming over here and a storm coming over here, and there's a 4-year-old tornado coming at the same time. You know what I mean? That's kind of what it feels like sometimes. And so during these seasons, we learned this really early on. We said the best thing we can do in the busiest seasons isn't to have like these massive date nights all the time, even though we should, and we do those things too. It is, how do we have like specific couch check-in time to go like, how are you doing like for real? And we're both tired and we're both ready to go to bed. And sometimes we fall asleep mid-conversation. Most of the time it's during my prayers that we fall asleep. But anyway, so we'll do that. And we go and like, but here's the other thing. We schedule it. We schedule it. And here's what I would say to you. Right? And I mean, it's like very, very kindly, very bluntly. Like, if you believe that God is personal, and not just personal when you need him, but personal daily, and I think you need to schedule out the time that you spend with God. And not to read your Bible, and not to pray for your food, though you should pray for your food, sure, great. And you should read your Bible, absolutely. But to say, this is the time that I'm going to get away with the God of the universe, and tell him what I'm thinking, and ask him what he's thinking, and listen. And every Christian that I've met that has been a Christian for more than like 5 years assumes they do this well. And almost all of us drift away from what this actually means. Now, here's what this tells you. Here's what the dashboard dial is. It actually tells you whether or not you have relational dependence on God. This is what this actually tells you. Or if you are mustering this up on your own, do you have relational dependence on God? And here's how you know. I really think this is how you know. How is the actual time that you are spending with God? What does that dashboard look like? Second one is this, right? It's living on mission, right? A lot of ways to talk about this. I know that there is. But the dashboard dial in this is whether or not you live with a sense of urgency when it comes to this area of your life, right? Whether you live with a sense of urgency. Let me tell you this. If you're not a follower of Jesus, this is not for you. If you are a follower of Jesus, I will say this. When it comes to your faith, and this is hard to say out loud because it feels guilt stuff, and it's not guilt. It really isn't. This is like living the way that God has called you to live. But if you don't remember the last time that you shared your faith with somebody, like actually shared your faith with somebody, then here one of two things are true, right? You either do not believe in eternal separation from God, or you just don't care enough about the people around you that they may not experience that with their life. I think that's true. I don't know how else to say it. Me and Emily get in these car rides to like Disney and stuff, or wherever we're going, to Orlando, 10 hours. And I love to talk about this at 6:45 in the morning. She less than I do, but I love to talk about this. And I would say, like, if we really believe in the God of the universe, and that there are people who choose not to be in relationship with him, if we actually believe that, it creates an urgency within us. And if it creates an urgency within us, and don't miss this, then you talk about what matters to you. Remember a few months ago, I talked about Severance. You guys remember the TV show Severance? I love this. Now it's been a few months. Now we don't. I told everybody I knew about Severance. Everybody. And then I watched the last season. Like, stop talking about it. But I get into it. I told everyone, it was so easy to talk about. When it comes to my faith, I joke, I told you this too. I got a new person who cuts my hair. Barber, is that what we call that? Barber? Yeah. But I had another barber, and I was hanging with her, and she would cut my hair, and I'd always kind of laugh. She would ask me what I did early on, and I used to just say I was in nonprofit work, because I didn't want to tell her I was a pastor, because then I got to answer questions about being a pastor. So you know this. I went to a barber. This has nothing to do with the message, but it was kind of fun. In the middle of those, I went to a lady, and she cut my hair. And when I sat down in the chair, I kid you not, she had her finger, and I didn't know what she was doing. She put her finger in my ear with wax. Has this ever happened to anybody? Without asking, I was like, I feel violated, number one. Number two, how bad do you think I need an earwax? So that this has nothing to do with the message. Now you're just grossed out. I shared Jesus with her. I'll tell you that. But anyway, so we did that. She did both ears before I even knew what was happening. She pulled it out. I literally screamed. There was a 7-year-old boy in the chair next to me. I made a noise that was embarrassing. But I thought about it. It's like, do I even care that the people around me may or may not be, with Jesus? And I would just say this, one of the dials that should matter to you is, do you live with a sense of urgency? And when you get around people who live with a sense of urgency and it makes you uncomfortable, it says more about you than it does them. More about your comfort and confidence than it does them. I think you should live with a sense of urgency. And if you're not sharing your faith, there's a reset that needs to happen there. And then the last one is this, and that's choosing generosity. Now, I'll say this every year. We talk about this every year. This is not a new thing for our church. I talk about this all the time. But I'll say this. When it comes to generosity, right, if you give comfortably without having to think about what you give, right, and I mean this so lovingly, I would say, like, that is fantastic. It requires almost no faith. It is a bill that you pay. And I would say, if that's you, thank you for giving to our church. I would love it if you continue to do that. And also, what I would love for you to do, not for our church, for you, is to experience what happens when you open your hands and you say, I trust you even more. And some of you are crushing the first one, you're crushing the second one. When it comes to this, if you're really honest about it, you trust God in every area except for your finances. You don't trust his provision. You don't. And I would just say this, some of you have set how much you're gonna give, and I say, I love that, I love it, but you don't reevaluate it based off of your season or your circumstances. And so without reevaluating, you know this, it feels like a bill that you pay, like you pay your light bill, and you never think about it. Now, I think automated giving is great. And also, I think every year we should reset and go, God, what do you want me to do this year? And open-handedly ask. And can I just be really honest? I'll just make everybody butt clench together. Is that okay? We'll do this together. If even talking about that makes you go, and it does me, to be really honest. We were about to have 2 points, not 3, earlier today, I'll say. But there's this, right? Can I just tell you, the more your reflex is to close your hands on that stuff, the more you need to exercise and go, here you go. Now, I grew up in scenarios, I'll just tell you, that says, if you open your hand more, God's just going to give you more. And whatever that thing is that you want, you're going to get it. I don't believe that. I don't. But I do believe that the miraculous work of God, as we open our hands, there are ways that God shows up in those ways where it feels like the math doesn't work, where it feels like the heart side of it is different. Like, it is incredible what happens when you trust God with the resources that he has given you to a faith level and move in that direction, right? So I put in here choosing generosity. I think this dashboard metric for us is this, that it's trusting for his provision along the way. So I'll tell you how we're going to wrap up this. I could give you like 25 more. I won't because I'm hungry too. But I'll tell you this, right? I'll tell you this. These three are the starting point for most of us in our life. And as we come to the end of this year, if you haven't like paused to reset, I want to give us the chance to do that. And there's not going to be anything cool or mesmerizing that's going to happen around this. I'm going to pull out my Bible. We're going to read the entirety of the law of Moses. I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. But I'm going to give you a chance to bow your head just for a second. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, right, I'm going to ask you to ask yourself the question in these three areas, where do you need a reset? Like an actual reset, right? Is it in the places where you're spending time with God and like actually spending time with God? All right, for some of you, is this like living on mission with a sense of urgency? Some of you, if you're really honest, is it a generosity thing? Now, with your heads bowed, eyes closed for a second, I'm gonna walk through these three for a second. And I want you to pay attention to your pay attention to that too. Your reflex, right? When I say this. The first one is, when it comes to spending time with God, be honest. Do you do that in a meaningful way and a consistent way? And if your reflex in that is to go, no, I want you to think about what it takes for you to reset it. It comes to spending time with God, scheduling it out, taking that space. Do you do that? Second one is living on mission or with a sense of urgency. To answer this question honestly, but when it comes to church, Christianity, or spiritual experience, is the vast majority of it what we do on Sundays or in a group? And do you actually care about the people who don't know Jesus yet? And one of the most honest and beautiful things that you could say is no if you don't. That's a great thing to say and then fix. Do you have a sense of urgency when it comes to your faith? As you're processing it, let me put it a different way. When you go to lunch today, if you go out, will it ever register in your brain whether or not the person that you're around knows Jesus or not? Frame it one more way, and this is something I think you should be really honest about. What are you actually afraid of when it comes to sharing your faith, inviting people, living in that? What are you actually afraid of? All right, last one is this. This is the choosing generosity one. I'm going to kind of go in on this, but I'd love for you to be honest about it. Do you feel like that you are giving away what God has actually called you to give away when it comes to your resources? And then answer the second part of the question. What are you afraid of if you were to obey him? And some of you, to be really honest, have you ever asked him, God, what do you want me to do? How much do you want me to give away? What are you calling me to give away? Now, I'm going to give you one more on this one. And this is an honest one and this is unique to our church. Some of you deconstructed your faith and you come back, which I love. Some of you have been in places where it's like the financial stuff was wonky and you don't trust authority, which I get that too. To be honest, I've been in those spaces before too. Some of you have, in a very real and honest way, stopped trusting what you feel like is the institution of the church with resources. And because of that, you've just pressed pause on it. And can I just tell you, if that's you, I'd love for you to be honest about that too. And then what I would love for you to do is to decide, and this is a very honest thing, to decide, is your giving about, how do I say this well? Is it about being obedient to Jesus? Or is it about all of the other stuff? At some point along the way, I think you should give to the places that you trust. Absolutely. I believe you should give to the local church. Absolutely. But at some point you have to decide, is this portion that God's calling me to be obedient with, is it mine to control, or is it mine to open-handedly say, God, this is yours? Last thing around generosity is I'd love for you to simply pray, God, what do you want to do through me and the resources that you've given me? So, Father, there are so many of these that we could go through, that we could process, that we could talk about. But many of us, including me, need a reset in these three areas. And Father, I pray that today is like the starting point of that. It doesn't finish here. But God, we need to continually come to you and evaluate, do we have that sense of urgency? We need to come to you and block out space to honestly go where you've called us to go. And God, when it comes to our resources, our time, the fullness of our generosity, God, I pray that you would help us to open-handedly come to you and trust your provision in that. And God, that you would help us to be people who become more and more and more and more generous over the course of our lives and never stop growing in that. God, that you would help us to do that. And that as we do that, God, that you would help us to be great stewards of what you do next. Father, I pray that as we come to the end of this year, we're about to go into Christmas season, everything's going to be a little bit exhausting, a little bit crazy, a little bit hard, a little bit Amazon, a little bit all of it. Father, I pray that before we even get into the fullness of that, that you would help us to reset now, to choose now what you want us to do, and that you would help us to trust you and grow in this next year as we move forward. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.